smiling is because just before Simon came up to introduce me, he leant over and checked and said, is that actually true? Do you really turn over $100 million? Which is a damning indictment on entrepreneurs. You probably all think we tell fibs and make things up. But anyway, thanks a lot for inviting me on this morning and for involving me today. I want to spend most of my slot talking about some of the myths around innovation, particularly for startups and entrepreneurs. I'll draw on some stories from our last 13 years of growing ByBox. So for that to make any sense, I'll give you a very, very condensed version of the ByBox story. So back in January 2000, I bought part of a factory in France that was making electronic left luggage lockers, which is one of the most boring things you'll ever come across. And we bought it because we wanted to try and build a network of banks of lockers for delivery of online shopping. So if you weren't going to be at home to receive the stuff you bought online, you could arrange to go to a locker that you wouldn't own, you just borrow it. That would be on a train station, a supermarket, a petrol station, somewhere where you're going to go anyway. So that was the original idea. Because it was all around the internet, it's back in January 2000, just before the internet crashed the first time, we thought a smart thing to do would be to go and launch this in Silicon Valley. So we opened an office in a place called Mountain View, just next to Palo Alto, right in the heart of Silicon Valley, and 3 weeks later the NASDAQ crashed, and the whole thing fell to bits, and we stayed there for about 6 months hoping for a happy ending, which didn't come. Almost ran out of money, came back to the UK in October that year, did run out of money, which is very sobering, and then stumbled into the idea. We bumped into someone at a trade show who was working for a company called Hayes PLC, and they were using mechanical lockers to deliver spare parts to mobile engineers. So in the middle of the night, delivering spare parts to banks of mechanical lockers, not electronic. And he thought this would be a great application for our locker and software technology and so on. So we then embarked on a whole different journey, went away from the online shopping delivery piece, and to cut a very long story short, we ended up buying that division from Hayes back in January 2003. So since then, the growth has fortunately been good, and today we employ about 800 people in 10 countries and have got lockers all over the place, and have just drifted back into the original idea of using lockers for online shopping. So that is essentially the sort of the short version of what we've spent the last few years doing. What I want to now do is to really draw out 3 myths, as I see it, around innovation from an entrepreneur standpoint and from a startup standpoint. And the first one, which has been touched on a lot today already, is all around funding. There tends to be, one of the most common gripes you'll get from entrepreneurs is that if only I had 20 million quid, I could introduce my innovation into the marketplace and I'd be really successful. I actually think that the biggest disease is being overfunded. Now, I think that there is a forced connection between funding and innovation, and funding and being successful. It was great to hear the Schumpeter quote. I'm a big fan of Schumpeter. I think it's absolutely spot on that it's constraints that force you to be creative, and there's no better constraint than not having any money. I think that if you don't have funds, when you think about it, the only sustainable way of running your business is to get to the customer. You can raise funds through a VC and through shareholders and so on, but that's a time bomb. The only way you can actually create a business is to solve a problem for somebody that they're going to pay you for. And I think the example of thermoelastics, by the way, was brilliant. And the way you've gone about understanding that problem and who the customer can be and how you get to that market is absolutely, you've quantified it absolutely spot on. And that, to me, is a brilliant example of proper innovation. So what I want to do now is just tell you the story in a bit more detail about how we competed with another locker company who had loads of money and what happened on that journey. And back in 2001, there was a Harvard Business Review report that was documenting all of the different kinds of companies like ByBox that was trying to solve this, as it's dubbed, last-mile delivery problem for online shopping. And there were over 20 companies worldwide, and most of them were very, very well funded by Sequoia Capital and whoever else. And we were literally, on this Harvard Business Review report, we were literally a footnote. So I still can't let this go, it still winds me up. It was literally, it just said something like that, and there's a company in the UK called ByBox that's also trying to do something similar. So if you roll forward a few years, and this is a factual point, so strip the emotion out of this, every single one of those companies, literally every single one went bust. Every single one, apart from ByBox, went bust. So yeah, the interesting question as always is why? Why did the companies with all the money and no end of opportunity to spend it on innovation, R&D, and so why did they go bust and we didn't? I'm not trying to make a big point, by the way, but it's an interesting point about how you build a company that is trying to disrupt a market. So In the UK specifically, there was one company called Business Direct who was very well funded, so they'd have been one of these other people in this Harvard Visionary report. They'd raised about £5 million through AIM, they'd quoted on the alternative investment market, raised some money, and at this point, we had bought that company from Hayes. I won't have time to explain how we bought it, because we didn't have any money to buy it, but that's a much longer story. And we had loads of 11,000 mechanical lockers. So Business Direct had raised £5 million to roll out a network of electronic lockers. And they were all the things that we weren't. They had a really professional team, full of people from the logistics sector, a reputable chairman, loads of money, a profile, and so on and so on. And they went about trying to essentially pinch all of their customers that were using our, as they would call them, dumbbox network, lockbox network, to choose the electronic lockers. And the fascinating thing about this for me is that the way Business Direct approached that was a very simple assumption that their solution was right. They just assumed that an electronic locker, for whatever reason, would be better for the customer than a dumb locker. So, and what you realise about that with the whole myth around funding is that it encourages you to be arrogant. So you're given loads of money by investors, and you're encouraged almost to be blind to what the market's telling you. You have to spend the money. The one thing is for sure, if you have £5 million, you will spend it. You have to spend it. That's what you're given it for, to execute your plan. So Business Direct went along this journey, spent the money, and meanwhile, we didn't have that luxury. And what you realise is that if you don't have the money, you have to work out very quickly what problem is that you can fix for somebody. And we realised quickly that it wasn't anything to do with the box. It had nothing to do with the locker, nothing to do with the thickness of the steel or the way the door opened or anything to do with that. It's all about the supply chain. It's all about trying to reduce inventory and move parts through a network in a way that was much more cost-effective for the customer. So roll forward 5 years, Business Direct went bust. And to me, that was a really fascinating time in understanding what are the real drivers of innovation. And I'll just very quickly explain one of the most powerful things that we invented. And even to call it an invention is talking it up. Because in the first few weeks after we had bought the company from Hayes, this dumbbox company, our biggest customer, which at that point was the warranty arm of Dixon, it's called Mastercare, went out for tender. And that's a nightmare. You know, the biggest customer is going out for tender weeks after you've bought the business. And Business Direct were an absolute shoo-in to win it. No, we had a big problem, and if we lost them, we definitely would have gone bust. And so you go to the customer, desperate, ask, what's your utopia? What is it we can do for you? A proper business problem where you'll leave the business with us. And the detail is not that interesting, but it revolved around, if you think about what a warranty company does, they send spare parts out to engineers, and everything that goes out must come back, either broken, because they've done a swap out of a PC in your home, or unused, because they could actually just fix it without using a spare part. So everything that goes out must come back. Well, because there was no tracking on the parts that at this point Dixon's the way they were sending them out through us, it was just awash with inventory all over the country, parts all over the place, massive buffer stock of expensive IT kit. And so this guy's utopia was, if you can track everything that goes out, make sure it comes back, well, that's got nothing to do with the box. All it simply required was a black stripe that we put on the outbound label with a two-dimensional barcode on to turn it into a return label. Incredibly low-tech, incredibly effective. We kept the account, and today we must have done about 120 million black stripe returns for about half of our customer base. It ended up being the single most useful bit of innovation we've done for a very long time, and it led on to some other things as well. So the sort of closing that first point, that first myth that you need loads of money to be innovative, I think is absolute nonsense. I agree with Schumpeter. It's constraints that force you to be creative. So the second myth, which is very much related to that beautiful black stripe, is the myth around that high tech is high growth, or that to be high growth you have to be high tech. So and to put it a different way, innovation must always revolve around trying to solve Alzheimer's or trying to do something that is impressive and fundamentally at its core technology-based. Now, of course, sometimes you need to. So the stuff that I was looking at earlier with hyperdrive and the quantum DX stuff, of course, you need science to do that. I get that. But that's not an excuse for companies that aren't science-based to not innovate. So you look at that black stripe for us, and you look at where that led next, and you start to understand that actually, innovation can be applied to all sorts of different things. When I mentioned that we acquired that company from Hayes, it was a division that was turning over £6 million. We really didn't have any money. We'd done some friends and family funding round to keep the lights on. but didn't have any money. The way we bought it, if you want to overstretch the word innovation, was truly innovative in terms of a deal. So and again, keep in mind the whole principle of make sure you understand the problem you're trying to solve for somebody and innovate around that. So Hayes, we'd signed a contract with Hayes to rent them 335 banks of electronic lockers over 5 years. The contract was worth about £10 million. 3 weeks after they signed it, the chief executive of Hayes decided to break up the group. And I was absolutely terrified. I thought, I've just spent more money making lockers, or halfway through making them even worse, than I've ever seen. And you're going to break up the group. But it became obvious that that little division, which is a stone in his shoe, was annoying, and his view was it was losing money. So the way we actually ended up buying it was he gave us £1.3 million to take the division away. Now, to this day, I still can't believe it. That was just astonishing. But when you properly understand someone's problem, you can... I'm not trying to overdo the word innovate, by the way, but in terms of deal-making, that was absolutely fascinating. And if I just roll forward a little bit then to... So the myth around, funding is required for innovation, wrong. The myth around it has to be high-tech to be high growth, that's wrong too. You then lead on to thinking, well, what kind of people do you need in your business to be innovators? Is it only scientists that can innovate? Well, of course not. I mean, you need scientists to do what Quantum DX are doing and to do what Hyperdrive are doing and many other things. I'm sure, in the thermogistics, I've got the word wrong there. Is it thermolastics? Sorry, thermolastics product. Again, there's a lot of science there, and I get all of that. But in our business, the really interesting thing is that the black stripe and where that led to, I didn't invent that. I didn't create that. It was created by a guy called Tony Meadows, who was running our distribution network. And Tony's about 6'2". He's got a back like a barrel, which is covered in tattoos. He's got half a forefinger through putting marquees up in a previous life, a port wine stained birthmark, and he's bald. He's the furthest thing from a scientist you could ever imagine, but he understood the customer's problem so well that he could actually come up with this little innovation that was fabulous for us. And where that led next was, if you can imagine all these parts flying around a transport network and through lockers and so on and so on, what goes out has to come back. But if it's coming back either broken or unused, wouldn't it be really helpful to know that? Wouldn't it be really helpful to know on the return journey, as engineers are scanning these things back into our locker banks, now using our wonderful electronic lockers, why don't they just tell us it's good or bad? But otherwise, what's the point in us taking all of this stuff back to the Dixon's warehouse or the Fujitsu warehouse or the British Telecom warehouse, wherever it happens to be, for someone to open it up and say, oh, that's broken, send it off to the repairer 3 weeks later? Why don't we do that? Why don't we actually ping that dynamically to whoever needs to receive it next? So the person that came up with that was the account manager. It wasn't me. It wasn't any one of our 40 software developers that we employed to code the software for us. It was someone that understood the customer's problem so well. And, of course, now loads of cable and wireless, loads of people now use that same dynamic routing of return solution that a lady called Sansi invented. So I'm going to close, because I know we've tried to catch up a little bit of time. So in closing, what I wanted to kind of reflect on, something that somebody said to me probably about 2 years ago, was that the first 20 people that you recruit into your company will set the DNA of your company forever. The first 20 people. And there's loads of people now that started companies, successful companies and so on. It'd be interesting to if we had time, to get your view on that, which I know we haven't. But I think that is a real caution around that, because be very, very careful who you recruit. And again, one of the problems with funding, if you do take on a load of VC funding because you think you need to, one of the risks with that is that what venture capitalists will tend to do is to look at your idea, look at your plan, look at you, and think it's fantastic. But you just need to strengthen your senior management team with some professional people, and that is an absolute disaster. Because these people, they'll have all the badges, they'll have all the demands for stock options, all the demands for company cars, and all the demands for everything else, and high salaries. And I can promise you that when you get to the day, and you will get to it if you haven't already, this has happened to me twice, so I've been crying in the toilet in the dark, where you are penniless and broke, and the company's on its knees. You need to be shoulder to shoulder, not with people that have got an MBA and that think, actually, I'm about to get a really bad blot on my CV. You need to be shoulder to shoulder with the pirates that will get you out of that, the Tony Meadows, the Sansis, that will be next to you, that desperately need to do it as much as you do. So be very careful who those first 20 people are. Make sure that they're curious people that genuinely want to understand the market. They don't have to be particularly smart or whatever, just people that have got the desperate passion about understanding the market as well as you have. And just try as hard as you can to make sure that those first 20 people, if you roll forward, if your company ended up being built on that DNA, on that sort of that genetic characteristic are the kind of people you want. And I don't think there's a week that goes by where I don't thank my lucky stars that our finance director was employee number 21. Thank you.